There we go.
Okay. All right, so do we want to start?
Sounds good to me.
All right, so I can either, I'll share it if I'm able to. Yep, I can. So this is obviously not the document. I just tried to take everything that was coming in that people were talking about and trying to lump it in some sort of organizational way. There were several different options for terminology. So I just put everybody's in there. So I tried to put them like, near, like, so we can see what everyone has and decide what we like. And that's kind of what we talked about as our goal for today, is just finding the areas that we do agree, like our agreement areas. And then we can next time talk about the areas that we may not find agreement. But a few people have sent their thoughts, comments, questions. Well, we can add those. So Miyako's one, and Howie threw some in as well. And I know that Meg wanted to talk about her, the outline and the terminology that she had worked on and published. And I think Javier had some stuff to bring up as well. So is that everything? Did I miss anything? All right, I'm gonna assume no. So this is kind of, again, correct me if I'm wrong anywhere, but we had talked about in some kind of paper, proposal, white paper. I assume it'll be kind of white papery, but we'll have obviously the intro and needs assessment. And then we talked about addressing, but not really writing about the human-animal bond or human-animal interactions, but it was worth noting why we were not including them. So there would be like a little description of what that is with examples of both of those. And then what we are defining, what we are recommending. We all, I think, most agreed that it was keeping it simple and then having subcategories versus a whole bunch of overarching categories. And then our process, how kind of like the Kathy Alm and PATH article, how here's what we did. We met with this many people, kind of the entire process. And then general considerations. I know we talked a lot about, goals, environments, credentials, research perspective, animal welfare perspective. So why we included the things that we included, and then a table or a chart, and then a summary conclusion. So we can look at that if we want as like subcommittees. So if we can break down, I think there was 20 some of us. So if we break into 4 or 5 committees, I think there was 4 or 5 areas, and each group wrote a portion of it, then we can, again, come back each time and kind of decide what pieces we like, what pieces we don't like. Does that sound okay? Anything that I missed or anything that is glaringly no? Okay, so I added here, and Howie signed up for a couple, but this is where we can kind of decide at some point where you want to be. Like if you're like, oh, I'll write this part, I want to be on this subcommittee, we can figure that part out after. So without getting into the entirety of the article, like this was just some stuff that others had written either through email or that notes I took through meetings, or what we got from the recordings, or stuff people emailed after. So I just tried to copy and paste a lot of it where I thought it would fit. So that would be there. The needs assessment part, and had said, certification, we talked about that before. The HAB, HAI, like all that fall under HAI. And then, so this part, I guess this is where we probably should start. What we're recommending, what do we like? I know we talked about animal assisted services. We talked about animal assisted related services, interventions, interactions. There was a lot of discussion surrounding that. And I think there was some concern that if we go too far outside of AAI, then it kind of makes it difficult for people pulling research from past, decades of research. So does anyone have any thoughts, comments they wanted to bring up in that area? Big enough for everyone?
By the way, I talked to Meg. She said that she's just getting on now. So,
Okay.
'cause I know she's got some things to
Yeah,
present.
she wanted to share her. Yeah, so we can,
Yeah.
when she pops on, she can.
Yeah.
She can share. Like I said, I took hers. I actually have hers up. If she needs that. Yeah, that was her. Can you see that one? Animal assisted. She went with services. This was published somewhere, I thought. Or that's what she wanted to propose as an option. But again, it's something that we, at least if we can come up with a majority consensus, will be great.
Yeah. Javier just asked if you could repeat the question.
Oh, I don't have a question. I just wanted to make sure we're all kind of in alignment, that we can, agree, at least if the majority of us can agree, because I mean, not everybody's going to be, in 100% agreement, but if we can at least get pretty close to agreement, that would be great.
By the way, just so that everyone knows who got on a little bit later, that this session is being recorded, just so that everyone knows that.
Yeah. All right. Is Megan yet?
Just to follow up on the idea that we want to stick with animal assisted interventions as the overarching umbrella term, because people need to find prior literature and so on. The only concern here is, just as Laura was mentioning from previous meetings, and I was mentioning from a research point of view, that all the visitation programs, which are the bulk of what volunteers do with animals right now, are clearly not interventions. And I don't remember, I've studied a lot of this literature, I don't remember any studies of visitation programs per se. So if we think everything else is okay to be called animal assisted interventions, but have those activities that are not led by a professional licensed in another area, whether it's therapy, counseling, psychology, social work, whatever. If there's a professional license, then I'm fine with saying whoever uses an animal in their professional practice could say they're doing an intervention. But these activities that are done, and that are still the majority of activities that are done by volunteers, maybe they should just be taken out, because at this point, there's not much scientific literature on that. I don't remember finding anything, and I really did a lot of, literature reviews, and, I was on grant reviewing and things like that. So everybody who wrote about anything animal assisted wrote about programs that involve some sort of specialty, specialist, professional.
Right. And I think that's why we talked about possibly using interactions instead of intervention.
Well, I thought practice is a neutral term that's much more, non-committal to anything else, but that was dropped, I can see. So
not necessarily dropped, it was just, it's still an option somewhere.
Yeah, I actually like the idea of practices. I think there is literature where they call it AAT and then they refer to the visiting things. I think that's
okay.
part of the problem.
I think that's even more misleading, because that's not AAT for sure.
Of course. And when Meg presents, you'll see that she came up with a new category, which could include them, which for me makes
I worked with Meg on that, actually.
Oh, okay.
We worked twice separately for that.
Okay, great. I don't know. So the idea of support, but of course, Meg will
Do we have a clean list somewhere of the options we've talked about? Animal-assisted interventions, animal-assisted interactions, animal-assisted
Well,
specialties, animal-assisted
This is the kind of
services. Do we have that? A
This is
list
the
of?
list that I have. But
Okay,
they didn't all, like, I didn't merge them, like,
okay,
I lined them up together, but I didn't merge them together. So pick and choose from each one. So a lot of this, as we talk through it, whoever wants to write it, be a part of the subcommittee and write this up would consolidate it into something a little cleaner. But I'll stop sharing so that Meg can do you have the capacity to share, Meg, or do you need?
Hi, I'm still just trying to get this thing working, so I'll just be 1 more minute. Yeah, if that's okay. I'm just, my computer's just literally chugging along at this, pace of a snail. So I'm trying to get everything, and I only just figured out how to get on. Yeah, I'll be 1 sec.
May I say something again, going back to the volunteer point of view, on the term intervention, I defer to the professionals on that, right? That is not my field. And I'm okay with the intervention term as long as we have a term like activities or whatever it is to cover most of what the volunteers do, right? And then the question that came up for me, so I'm a volunteer handler. I take my dog to the library and we read with children. We're not measuring, we're not documenting, we have goals, but not written goals, right? So that's an animal assisted activity. Now, if I'm in a school participating with a teacher or a counselor and they are documenting this and there are goals and they're assessing this, right? Then I'm still a volunteer, but I'm participating in a therapeutic activity alongside. I'm not administering the therapy, right? Or the education, the professionalism. And I just want terms for this because, as you noted, the volunteer aspect is so large and it's growing, right? And just clarification of that, and maybe a term for even what the volunteers do, whether it's animal assisted volunteer work or just something that easily describes what I do. Animal assisted volunteer, that seems pretty straightforward, right? Something I can use to describe to the public what I do. But as far as the intervention, I don't like it as a term for what I do, right? That's too dramatic. But if you as professionals feel that best applies to what you do, that's okay, as long as there's something to look at what the volunteers do.
Yeah, I'm just wanting the volunteers to feel respected and that they get the credit they deserve.
Thank you. I appreciate that because yes, I don't know what the numbers are as far as the number of professionals working with animals versus the number of volunteers working with animals, right? We don't even know how many volunteers there are. And as I've said several times, right, that just keeps growing every year. The demand, we have such demand for volunteers just in the Denver area. We can't possibly meet it. I could have 3 times as many volunteers and not meet the demand. So just remember that. And I appreciate you all respecting that. You are respecting that. And I appreciate you including that in your work.
Javier raised his hand before. Is there something you wanted to say?
Yes, well, hi everyone. Well, I was listening to you and I have I'm a bit worried about this too, because in the one hand, of course, it is important that volunteers and everyone that works in this field feels represented by the terminology we choose. But when I speak, when I say intervention, and I know that it can be different because of the language, because I'm in Spanish. So perhaps in Spanish, interventions means different things than in English. But when I say that I'm developing an intervention, what I mean is that I'm trying to do something to create an effect. And thinking from the opposite point of view, I would like to think in loud voice about what is the opposite to do an intervention, because for me, visiting programs are a kind of intervention because you include the animal in order to get some effect. The way in which you get an effect sometimes has to do with psychotherapy, other times has to do with ludic or well-being or whatever, no? But at the end, you're trying to get an effect. And I think when I think of removing or animal-assisted activities or visiting activities and so on from intervention, for me, is strange. I would rather keep
agree.
them within interventions, because at the end, it doesn't matter if you are doing psychotherapy or something different, or you are just doing visiting, but at the end, you are trying to you have your goals, and you are proposing some means to get your goals. So for me, it's a way of intervening or to make interventions. That's my point of view.
Mhm.
Sorry, Amy, and the group, I'm got my things up to now. So just to let you know, sorry to
You
interrupt.
can share. Yeah, you can share your screen.
Would you like me to share, or would you like to just keep it up as you had before?
Whichever you prefer.
Okay. Well, I think I just firstly, thanks so much for letting me share. I just wanted to say, introduce the document. Did you guys, I think everyone got to read that document from the equine summary that I put together. I think it might be useful just to, if you want to share for me, Amy, that would be really great. Thank you so much. In just recently, 2021, I put together just this summary document. Thanks so much to Daniela for sending it to me again. I remembered reading it and then forgot it completely, and then joined this little this committee to focus on terminology. And it was really useful to reread and to really digest and to get a sense of why would we want to make sure that we were aligned with what they had already been experiencing and researching and thinking in the equine assisted space. And for me, it's a no-brainer that we would want to do that because it seems it would be incredibly unfortunate if there was all this work done and we weren't utilising it. And they came together, as you can read with this document. The overview was to look at optimal terminology, same focus as our committee, but they started to look at particularly terminology recommended for discontinuation due to being ambiguous, misleading, no longer useful, or having adverse effects on stakeholders. And if you want to scroll down a little bit for me, Amy, that would be great. But they talk specifically about needing terms that have precision and clarity in terminology being essential. And of course, the same thing that we're all on about, which is not just for practice and clarity and knowing who's who in the zoo, but also for science and for research to be able to move forward. So that was just a little summary bit of this document first, which of course was from the journal that you've got listed there. They had a big group of people, and they didn't get a consensus in the sense that everybody agreed. I think there was a couple of, it was a majority. What they discussed in the end was having 3 areas and 12 distinct types of services from an equine assisted perspective. So they looked at simplifying it into therapy, learning, and horsemanship. And the reason why this is so important to us is I believe that we can easily grab, as we've looked at we'll go back to in the chart and the recommendations that I have and that I discussed with Daniela, and also ran it by Michael too. But that I think that it's very sensible to continue using the groupings of therapy and learning. And whether we need to continue with learning or education, I think both will suit purpose. But the whole focus that the terminology needed to include what, of course, in the equine context is all about horses, horsemanship, horse riding, horse coaching, vaulting, therapeutic riding, all of the stuff that has unfolded that is not equine-assisted therapy. It's not equine-assisted counselling. It's not equine-assisted psychotherapy. It's not equine-assisted speech path, OT, or physical therapy. And it's not equine-assisted education facilitated by a teacher. It's not equine-assisted learning facilitated by a coach who's done, let's say, 120 hours or 200 hour training in an equine-assisted education program, and they're facilitating for learning goals. But there are a lot of people, and they're usually riding coaches, or they're people that own horses, or they're passionate riding people that have set up all this wonderful stuff around vaulting for people with specialist needs, and adaptive riding and driving and therapeutic riding, but it's not facilitated by a physiotherapist. So they're working with all this mobility and increasing skills and capacities for their clients with particular disabilities or abilities or unique needs and special needs. So they're very I guess, well, it's not the same as what Laura's talking about, but there's more complexity in the horsemanship area, which for me, in our parallel, is the animal training area and the animal assisted support services. But I just want to mention a couple of other things about the document before we move to recommendations. And that is, let me scroll to take a breath. Yeah, maybe scroll down, because I think therapy is fairly obvious, learning's fairly obvious, that they clarified that the learning and the horsemanship are non-therapy modalities. And then that was needing to be made very clear, so that we had T for therapy, and then we had E or L, learning, for learning, and horsemanship related to animal training, i.e. horse training, horsemanship, horse riding, horse coaching related stuff. A lot of the problems from a science point of view with the equine assisted practice is that people use terms interchangeably, like we do in the animal area. And they'll say, oh, I'm going for my horse therapy session, or I'm going for my horseback therapy session, or I'm going for my equine, or people would even propose research and call it equine assisted activities and therapies, like all in a big jumble, activities and therapies. Well, what is it? And what is it specifically, so that we can research it? And in fact, when you looked at it, it was equine facilitated learning or equine assisted learning, or it was therapeutic riding that was called therapeutic riding, but there was no therapist anywhere to be seen. It certainly wasn't equine assisted therapy or psychotherapy or counselling. It was riding from a riding coach who had now developed a specialist ability to work with people with specialist needs, but they're not actually qualified, trained, etc. So this document, even though it has different sort of specifics, it does talk about problematic terminology. Equine therapy, it's too generic. It means that there's a lot of misleading understanding. Equine assisted activities and therapies, same thing as I said, it's all grouped together. Even equine assisted therapy, they thought was not specific enough, and people had to be more specific and say equine assisted speech therapy, or speech therapy including horses, occupational therapy including horses, psychotherapy including incorporating horses. But the other ones that were problematic were hippotherapy, because of the, well, a whole lot of reasons that I won't go into. But the list here, I think, is important to understand the reasons to discontinue problematic terminology. Consumers had difficulties identifying and accessing the service that would best meet their needs and that would ensure their safety. When payers were getting, inaccurate sort of payment codes and ways of describing it meant that people couldn't be paid correctly, or fee for service was incorrect. If you want to scroll down a little bit there for me, Amy.
Sure.
And then the other two that they talked there about were journalists using sound bites such as horse therapy and stories obscured the distinct nature and value of particular services from the public's view, and researchers applying generic terms led to labeling any service that incorporated horses, for example, equine assisted therapy. So it's the same context as us. It would be called animal assisted therapy, but here, of course, it was called equine assisted therapy. And it led to a lot of inconsistencies, so much so that when people have done lit reviews, like Daniela was sharing before, there's hardly anything that's clearly, specifically stated, oh, that was equine assisted physiotherapy or physical therapy. Oh, that was equine assisted psychotherapy, and they were focusing on a CBT intervention with that, or that was. So there's nothing that's that specific, and that's of course what we need. So looking at this, I thought, well, it's so simple, and yet if we can probably move to the recommendations of my chart. Thanks, Amy. It was pretty easy just to continue using those first two. I thought it's a bit of a no-brainer to keep the therapy, the educational, the learning, and then in sort of brainstorming it a little bit with Daniela, I was feeling like animal-assisted support activities was a useful way to be more specific about what Daniela kept trying to get me to focus on, which was, well, what's the goal of the service? Is support. It's support for people with support needs. And so it meant that what we can include there was a whole range of animal-assisted sessions or interactions, or but they had their focus about where the animal's providing support and the service or the interaction is providing support, and that it's an activity rather than an intervention, which I'm quite happy to use as a psychotherapist. It's very familiar for me to be utilising the term an intervention and in a research context. And I think even from an education point of view, it's not a long shot. So I'm neither here nor there about keeping the term intervention in the broad terminology, but when I thought about this third category, animal-assisted support activities could include visitation animal activities, such as pet partners, courthouse dogs, crisis intervention support animals and support teams, support dogs and support teams in medical centres or dental clinics or on university campus, for example, where the dogs or the animals clearly are there to support the students or to support the people in the centre. And there's not someone facilitating a process that has a very specifically potentially measured therapeutic or educational goal and outcome, but rather some really important support needs are getting met. So that's the kind of third section. And then the fourth section was my version. Oh, you can stay there for a minute. Oh, well, yeah, no, that's fine, Amy. The fourth section, I needed to find a way to include the horsemanship. And I also needed to find a way to include animal training, animal therapists, animal behaviouralists, animal practitioners, people that are providing primarily what I see as animal specialist services, or they are bringing in an animal handler or an animal team or an animal behavioralist or an animal trainer to be the specific focus of the activity, support, intervention, interaction, whatever it is that we all decide going forward. But so in here, when I thought about horsemanship, clearly horsemanship is it's training of horses. Broadly speaking, you need a riding coach to be offering therapeutic riding to clients. You need a riding coach to be offering vaulting to clients with disabilities or a range of abilities. You need a very specifically well-trained dog, as far as I know it, to be providing an assistance animal that can on cue respond in particular ways. Now that's intensive long-term animal training, which is different to a short session like a vaulting session, but they're all related to animal training and training of the animal. That means that it's the person that's facilitating or primarily responsible for the placement of the assistance animal or for the provision of the session should be an animal specialist, and that the focus is really including that. So in this section here, the best kind of terminology that I was thinking about would be something that specifically talks to the animal training part of it. So there's still support activities or support interventions, interactions, specialist support, but they're animal training in their focus and in their delivery and in their qualification and in their specialty. So that's where the animal training support, specialist support idea came from, because I needed to separate it out from the animal assisted support activities into the animal training specialist support.
Meg,
So that's that.
Meg, I just
Yes.
wanted to ask you a question about the section. I think it was great that you added that. I think I sent you an email. I don't know if you saw it before you got on. But I'm just wondering if it should be animal training specialist or animal specialist, because you're not training the horse in the two equine assisted sections that you put there.
Yes, sorry, what did you say? What did you?
Okay, no, just that I was wondering in terms, I think it was great that you put the animal specialist, animal training special support. I was just wondering about the two equine areas that you put there. They're not training the animal. I mean, for instance, in the prisons or, you know, working with dogs in prisons or with at-risk kids, that is training the animal, but using the training of the animal to help the prisoners or the at-risk youth. But with the equine activities, it's not training the animal. That's why I was wondering if you might just leave off the training part. And these are animal specialists, whether it's animal specialists with the dogs or animal specialists with the horses. And that might fit in the equine. I was just looking at the logic there.
I think that's would fit the brief. I think the main thing is that you know, like when you compare therapeutic riding or vaulting with equine assisted psychotherapy or something like that, the horse has to have been trained, and they have a lot of very specific training. So I think that has to have been either in or during, before or after the session of the therapeutic riding or the vaulting or the whatever. So that's why I kind of in the end sort of thought about that emphasis. But I know that there's also in some of the email shares, Miyako also had some concerns and thoughts about it. And oh, Michael's got his hand up too. So yes. Do you want to share something here, Michael?
Well, sure. I love so much of this framework. I think it's very strong. I do think we have a challenge in this particular column, and Nancy just articulated it. Saying that the therapeutic horsemanship instructor, therapy riding instructor is focused on the horse, it's not true. It's focused on the person riding. And in far too many situations, training the horse during the interaction is absolutely irrelevant or secondary. So many clients we work with do not even have the capacity to really actively ride by themselves, or they're not old enough. So taking out the word, Nancy, animal training into animal specialist, it still provides a challenge. That's just my thought.
Yeah, Michael, did you want to say any more about how you might work with that challenge? Because clearly it needs a category of itself.
Well, I think, the animal training is relevant. It's important because there are definitely activities that are more animal training focused. So I don't have an elegant solution. Maybe somebody else wants to chime in. Do you have any? I mean, is therapeutic riding more under support activities because we're supporting riders in a therapeutic horsemanship interaction or intervention, whatever you want to call? Meg,
Yeah.
How about moving it over?
Yeah, I mean, that was the sensible thing that I was thinking about, is that in a way, giving those two options, it allows the facilitator or the focused person in a way to self-identify as an animal training support specialist or an animal assisted support, offering support activities. I don't see a problem with that, because to be honest, and this is probably totally biased and no doubt, but to be able to just even clean up the T from the E is amazing. And then separating out the support activities from the animal training or animal focused specialists is amazing. So I'm in the ballpark of just even happy-ish if we can do something like that. So I really feel in a way that if we get terminology that's broad enough that people could go, well, I could be there or there, well, then I go, whoa, well, that's good. But as long as it's not there or there. So that's kind of where I am thinking about that.
Sorry, and I think to your point, Meg, I love personally, I know Laura's and Daniela's were very similar, but that the rubric is kind of set up like a rubric, right? It said, what's your education level? What are your goals and outcomes? I think there were 4 altogether, and I think that takes this one step further. So if you're in that, like, I'm not really sure which one I am, if you have like that other, I'll just pull it up since it probably will be easier. But it makes I think it helps to clarify that a little more. So I don't know if you can, that was the initial chart, but I can call it the
They're
real.
so small.
I know it is super small. It was just so that you have like your subcategory, so everything that was in animal assisted therapy, was built in there, but they could still use the same categories or categories. But then you break it down into type of activity, who is the provider, what are your credentials, what are the animal credentials, what is the setting and context, what is your implementation, documentation, but it takes it to that next layer, I think, in my opinion.
So back to that rubric, that rubric is addressing animal assisted interventions, interactions, whatever, unless the fourth column is specifically about trainers who are training animals involved in animal assisted interactions, interventions, etc. I feel like that should be outside of the animal assisted column, document.
You mean like HAI? You would put that under.
To me, much of that is HAI, correct.
What's AAJ? What's that one?
Human animal interaction.
Oh, H. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
HAI, because it is an interaction, but it's not animal assisted training. It might be training of animals who are involved in AAIs, but it's not an AAI itself.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So it,
yeah, my initial kind of recommendation was having a whole separate category for this that distinguished. But then I was thinking, the simpler we get, the more use we're likely going to get. And but yeah, I hear you completely. Yeah, I agree.
I personally am a dog trainer that only trains potential therapy animals. I train them to prepare for the evaluation by Pet Partners or another organization, but I also train registered therapy animals in the clinic once they've achieved that, their certification or registration, depending on who they're with. So it's very specific to training animals who are involved in animal assisted interventions, and yet I'm a dog trainer who specializes or so I don't.
You wouldn't
like,
see yourself in that chart?
No, I don't. I see it fitting under human animal interactions. It's a specialty area of dog training. It's not an intervention or interaction itself.
There are,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, there in Australia, some of the dog trainers and the animal trainers become or involve themselves in the interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And
I do.
This is the problem, that it actually becomes an alternative, and people go, the consumers don't know. So then that's been called in our country potentially a whole lot of different names, but the consumers go, oh, well, I could just get a PTSD dog, for example, and call that animal assisted therapy or animal therapy, or there's my animal therapy dog, or I have trauma, so I am, so that's why in a way it's here, Laura, is because there's a lot of confusion in Australia, even though we have some people have some beginning understanding of terminology. It's always confused. And so my concern is if it still continues to live outside of the animal assisted kind of terminology, it's going to get included back in anyway. It's going to be, it's going to find a way to be still, the terminology, the public will still use the terminology, the consumers will still use the terminology. Yeah, it's just really tricky to know how to manage it. I hear what you're saying, but there, would you, let me just ask one more question, Laura. I can't see you anymore, but would you, for example, go to an animal assisted conference?
Oh, yes. Yes, I attend them a lot.
Yeah.
So,
so that's why I think that you belong in animal assisted umbrella of sorts,
Hmm.
because you're already there, and so is everybody, and everybody needs to be included somehow, and this is the challenge.
Mhm.
Debbie,
Yeah.
did you
Well,
want
I
to speak?
think, oops, I was
Debbie
just gonna
had-
say, I think linguistically, because I'm not an animal assisted trainer, I'm a trainer of animals involved in AAI. Yeah, the animals aren't assisting me with my training. I'm not partnering with an animal to provide training services.
Absolutely.
You know, yeah. But I really like, I like that it's been captured. You know, it's a very valuable and you know, important piece, I think. I just, linguistic wise, I just don't know that it fits there.
I think part of it is that you have to educate the public. And this may be an impossible task depending on how ethical the dog trainers are, that to tell them that they have to tell the public, no, I am not a therapist and your dog is not giving therapy.
But there are different kinds, right? You're talking about different kinds of dog training. For example, if you're a therapist or if you're whoever you are, let's say you're in an inmate program, right? Where you're working with the inmates to train the dogs, right? That's benefiting the inmates and the dogs, right? That's a professional program, I'll call it for lack of a better word, versus if you're somebody who is really just, I don't want to say just, but just a dog trainer, right? Yes, the training you do to the dog, whether it's for a pet dog or a therapy dog, is going to impact people, but you're not working with people and the animal, right, Laura? Is that the kind of thing you were trying to say?
Well, yes, and actually I do both, because in the clinic I'm training the therapy animal team. Also,
Right, so
and
I mean, there are different levels of this, right? There's just the dog training aspect. There's the working with people to train horses or dogs because it's benefiting the people and the animal, right? Then there's you working with the team, the therapy team. But I mean, I agree. I think that this category could be better broken out, or that these things don't all fit together in this category.
You can see I have different roles. Sometimes I'm just a dog trainer, and sometimes I do an activity. Javier, you've had your hand up for a while now.
Yes, well, first of all, I wanted to say that I enjoyed reading the proposal, because it's the first time that I read something like this. But listening to you, I had the impression that the fourth category, the animal training category, has a different aim when compared to therapy, education, or support activities. Those three activities or actions are devoted to change people or the clients. Meanwhile, the fourth of them, the animal training, has to do with changing the animal. Sometimes changing the animal or training the animal could be included within the therapy or the education, because you want to work using training as a means to develop your psychotherapy or whatever, no? And they can be overlapped somehow, but I wouldn't include the animal training support or animal training within animal assisted things, no? Animal assisted, because at the end our aim is different, I think. That's my impression. And
I
beyond
just want
this,
to say one thing very quickly. This section is to parallel the horsemanship section that is very clearly focused on the humans' goals as well. So if you think about it with the parallel in horsemanship in our equine assisted field, the horsemanship, like the hippotherapy, the riding therapy, the vaulting, it's all for the clients, the human clients. It's just that the focus is on is being provided by a riding instructor, a coach, who's not offering education or therapy. So just remember the parallels. So this was my best way to parallel. So it's not really animal training as we're talking about it in the way that it looks, even though that was what I wanted to bring to you guys to capture that, because animal training is the best parallel that I could think of that replaces the word horsemanship. But it's not, it can't be that accurately understood. And that's why I think we're all having difficulty with this category, because there's inherent difficulty. It's just good to remember the parallel in the riding, in the equine assisted space. It's referring to therapeutic riding. It's that is not facilitated by a teacher with a particular intervention or by a psychotherapist for a particular intervention. It's actually a riding coach who's done some training, either a small amount or an intensive amount, in providing specialist support for people with disabilities or a range of neurodiverse clients with particular abilities, for example. So just keep that in mind, that that's what we're trying to work with. And so when I was bringing it into the animal context, we also had to bring in what Laura's talking about, which is in Australia and internationally, by the sounds of it, Laura herself, the assistance dog trainers, for example, do work with the clients that they're pairing their animal with. And in some occasions, actually, you know, like, I wouldn't say it's definitely not a facilitated process. It's definitely not a process, but it's some interaction, some support, some kind of relating. And so hence why we've got all this difficulty here. But I just wanted to remind everyone that the parallel here is the horsemanship section from the equine assisted context. So sorry to interrupt, Javier.
That's okay. I know. And, sorry, because I know Debbie had also had commented a while ago, and I wanted to make sure we can get to Debbie as well. And then Maria,
Thank you.
Well, I would like to answer if you don't mind, because at the end I think that, well, I understand that horsemanship means that the relationship between the horses and people, I guess. No, it's a bit strange for me, this term. But at the end, I think that we still finish speaking about vaulting or concrete actions. For me, concrete actions are not really good for having an idea of the work that you are doing. If people are riding a horse because it's funny for them or because they get a good interaction, it could be something spontaneous, perhaps. No, it will be within the human-animal interactions. But if they vault or they do something with an aim, then that's a program, that's an intervention, and thereby I would include them with it and in the correct kind of intervention that you are developing. If they are vaulting because they are trying to improve their ability or they are trying to improve their back, then physiotherapist should be included. And if they are learning something that is good for their development in the school, you need someone who is a specialist in interventions regarding school and so on. So that was my opinion. Thank you.
okay, Debbie, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I think what Matt suggests is maybe training is the medium to help our client to grow. So this is my understanding, but I think the term animal training, as Laura mentioned, is kind of easily confusing. How about if you train in animals, but it is not a medium for a client to grow, then for me, it shouldn't locate in the animal assisted category. I think we have to separate it, and because the term is really confusing. So this is my concern. Thank you.
Sure. And Mariana, I want to make sure to get to you too.
Thank you, Amy. I think about training as a subcategory of animal education, animal assisted education. Perhaps we could use to teach someone to take care of a horse, for example, or to training a dog. It's a kind of learning for the people that take part of this. So I think it's fitted as a category of education.
Thank you.
To add to Marianne, what you're saying, I think maybe it's a psychoeducation. And that's a problem that I have, trying to find a place exactly where you put psychoeducation and all this. Who does it? Is it a counselor? There's lots of tricky places. A counselor can do psychotherapy, or a counselor can do psychoeducation, for instance, and then where do you put it? A lot of work that's going to have to be done there.
Yes. Yes, I think that the difficult came from the really think that all of the kind of service we can offer have something in common. So it's very difficult to be very strict to do a category that not include another one. I think that's the point.
And that's where I think too, going back to Daniela's extra chart with the extra categories gives us that extra layer. So if we're going back to, you know, is it a goal directed? You know, what are the goals? What are the goals for the humans? What are the credentials of the person providing? You know, I do the same thing. I am a counselor and I'm a dog trainer and I do prison programs for youth. However, I have other people that are dog trainers that are not counselors that also run the program with me, and they're not. So now they're not doing therapy, they're doing, so it does add that extra.
It's confusing.
Right, it is.
It is.
But that's where I like having the extra support activities, or, you know, having a special category for that. You know, but I think if people can recognize that, I guess I'm looking at it sort of like a paraprofessional. I'm not sure if you have them everywhere, but if you're not a teacher necessarily, but you are still supporting a student in the classroom, you know, so you don't have the training or the credentials or the licensure of the teacher, but you're still you're teaching math skills, or you're teaching reading skills, or you're working with kids outside of that. So it's still considered, I guess, a learning environment, but the person is not, that's like the paraprofessional. That's part of that interdisciplinary, like what Laura's talking about. Like if I'm part of an interdisciplinary team, I'm working with a professional, a licensed professional, but I'm here as the dog handler. So I'm the handler, but I'm also part of animal assisted therapy or education or whatever it is.
And Amy, just to jump off, this is where Yamato feels very strongly that we cannot forget. And one of the reasons we're doing this is because real animals are being involved in activities. So we need to make sure welfare is provided, that we have standards, so forth. Humane educators, environmental educators that work with living animals fall into the category you're talking about now, and they do not work with, you know, licensed people. They are sort of doing these activities, and therapeutic riding instructors kind of fall into that. Javier, I really liked your thinking about how fluid this is, and this idea of the rubric that a physical therapist can teach their client to, quote unquote, ride a horse, but their goal is hand-eye coordination, fine motor dexterity, and so forth. So just putting it into the animal training side doesn't work. And Meg, the one thing I wanted to say, I think one reason why the horsemanship doesn't transfer as easily when we broaden it to all animals is that horsemanship is much more than just the mechanical act of training a horse. There's so much more involved in that, and that already is established. It's not so much once you broaden it to all animals involved in human-animal services.
Yeah, there's not an equivalent, is there? Yeah. I think just lastly, the thing that I wanted to say is, and I think it's what Amy, you just said, is that when we bring in the rest of the rubric, but when we bring in the understanding of qualification, then we start to speak more specifically to qualification and goal. We start to speak more specifically to where are we, you know, because where would you put Amy, the person that you work with in those prisons? Where would you put him or her, just out of interest? Where would you?
Right, like currently, you know, I'm more professional focused. So I have in one program, I have a teacher who's facilitating. So I have a dog trainer and a teacher. So we're, in that case, we're focusing more on the educational aspects of it. So I would consider that an animal assisted education. It's all part of the same program, but our emphasis is a little bit different. They can't, yeah, they can promote empathy and patience and perspective taking and perseverance in the youth, but they're not, you know, unless I bring in, and sometimes I can do that with some of the facilities, I can bring in one of the therapists as a part of the team, you know, and then it can be a therapeutic. So we're branching out into, we do vocational, educational, and therapeutic kind of all together. And that allows us to capture anyone in our program who's running that. But it is tricky. Danielle.
Yeah, so maybe what we've been struggling so much with all along is we're trying to find a label for every variety of practice, and this gets very confusing. And when I read your wonderful outline and summary, I was again overwhelmed by the proliferation of so many labels. So instead of trying to have a label for every type of practitioner, I'm now thinking, instead of using the words training, maybe just use what somebody proposed as alternative programs or animal assisted specialty programs, and bundle into that third category anything that's done by paraprofessionals, which could include horsemanship, animal training by prisoners, anything that involves, as you know, Meg was saying, for instance, in her fourth category, provided to support people with special needs through the mechanism of animal training. So the mechanism of animal training is a modality here, but it is with benefits for the people who are taught how to train animals, whether they're prisoners or youth at risk or so on and so on. So why can't we just have a category of alternative programs? And then when somebody wants to explain what they're doing under that category, they could say, I am a paraprofessional that, you know, trains youth at risk in horsemanship or in taking care of horses or in training dogs and so on. And that would simplify a little bit things, because if we keep adding more and more labels just to make our own type of practice fit into a separate label, it's going to be really overwhelming for the public. You can't explain this to the public. The public doesn't know what's the difference between psychoeducation and education and psychological practices, right? So we need something much simpler. Is it therapy? Is it education? Is it an alternative type of practice? That's my take on it. I'm still thinking, how are we going to deal with all the terminology so that somehow the public doesn't get confused, the researchers don't get confused, and people try to sort of get a sense that all these practices have some validity. You know, that's where the problem is, and that's why I get so sort of worked up over this, because in my world, a lot of these animal practices involving animals are still looked upon as sort of not having scientific validity. So how can we simplify things to get this message across that what we're doing has validity. And I think coming with a specific label for each other type of practice is not helpful, but finding a more, inclusive, comprehensive category that would cover all these paraprofessionals might be a way out. I don't know.
So Daniela, can I just ask? Oh, sorry, Michael.
I was just going to quickly say, Daniela, I really like your thinking in that we need to step back, what the general public will see, what the media will see, not get overly lost in our detail. Just a one thought, the term alternative, I hate because
Yeah, I know. I don't like alternative either, but that was,
Laura,
yeah.
That was
bizarre
here.
there.
Yeah, so I'll make sure.
Yeah.
So we will not use this. And Javier
Yeah.
said thing in the chat about alternative.
Specialty, I don't know, is that new category that somebody was proposing, but we just need to find sort of a more comprehensive name for that.
And Pep
Are you
Partners is
saying,
always
Daniela,
already using.
Are you
that.
saying, Daniela, that we have the animal assisted therapy, the animal assisted education, and then maybe the animal assisted support services, for example, includes both, like on my chart 3 and 4 together?
I think that's a possibility, and the support services could be those types of services in which paraprofessionals are involved, and then also activities in which volunteers are involved that are not necessarily paraprofessionals. So I don't see why support services couldn't include the training part. I don't know. I'm just thinking of ways to simplify this enormous spread of different labels.
How do people respond to that? Just having a third category and combining the two.
I like it. I think it keeps it simple, and it well, a couple of things. I like that it keeps it simple, and then adding that extra layer of if it doesn't, I can't totally tell, then I can go into that next layer of either the narrative or the rubric, and it fits there. And then everything else, we're still talking about HAI is over here. There's still stuff that's out there that's not related to this at all, but we still addressed it, and it's out here. The only other piece that I would like that has been kind of a big deal, the work I've been doing previously, is making sure that we're including elements of the animal. I think that's a little earlier too, in just concern that there's animal welfare written into the definition.
I think the animal welfare should be, I think one thing that we're missing is maybe that at a later point of view of trying to work in how everyone has to not only say, be a psychotherapist and have an animal with you, but be trained in order to be an animal assisted psychotherapist. And that would include, and again, in a perfect world where, everyone had to go study, extra studies in immediate work, called an animal assisted, whatever, then they would have to, part of their studies would be animal welfare and ethics in general.
Oh yeah.
But Nancy, don't we need to be careful, because we're now transitioning into defining the credential for the person doing what our task is to come up with the terminology for the activity. We just need to be careful to get lost.
I think you're right. And I think it's a process with different steps. First, the terminology. And what I envision, my vision coming out, is that the next step that we could work on is actually talking about what type of credentials for the people doing it, what type of preparation the animals may or may not need. And I'm seeing an article here.
Yeah,
I'm seeing an article here. Yeah.
There's a provider group. There's an educator provider group that is happening simultaneously, Nancy, and it had one meeting, and I wasn't I'm in it. I missed that one meeting and there's no more meetings. So I think they're already summarizing something from one meeting. So I'm not sure that that's going to be happening.
Yeah, it is, but I know Melissa's heading up that meeting, that one, and she ended up having to have a heart procedure. So I think that's kind of been on hold for a little bit, but it is something that they're still working on, and she's got some of it done through Animal Assisted Intervention International. It was built kind of around the competencies that were through the ACA endorsed competencies, and groups have now taken on. Pet Partners has taken them on. Pet Partners also has their animal assisted professional. Is that right, Laura? Animal assisted
AAI for professionals.
Right. So there are organizations that are starting to become credentialing, I guess, bodies, so that they're able to say, like, have you done like I know in AAII that you have to put together like this whole portfolio. You know, what is your education? How many hours, you know, have you had 300, 400 hours of animal behavior related content? You know, what is your experience in this area? It is coming, but I think that you're right, Nancy, it's totally needed. But there are some groups, and IAHI was a part of that too, that they're starting to, but you know, who says? You kind of have to do it through individual organizations, and who's going to oversee it, and how do we make sure people follow it?
Now, here in Israel, what was happening, there are all sorts of programs that were popping up all over the place. Some were good and some were less good. And so that's the reason why we started our organization. And we said, okay, we are the Israeli Association for Animal Assisted Psychotherapy. And we only recognize for our members people who have had such and such credentialing, such and such training. And then all of a sudden you saw the programs were adding more courses and adding more hours and adding more supervision. And like it happened within a year and a half, that a number of the programs all of a sudden added more, and other programs just disappeared because their graduates, you know, people who were wanting to sign up for the programs realized they wouldn't be recognized. So then they preferred to go to the programs when then they would be recognized for the professional association. So I don't know if that helps, but it's something that worked here in Israel. Not that we're not still fighting things, but
again, everyone, this conversation is amazingly important, super, super important. But I don't think that's the conversation we're having, right?
Right.
The conversation, terminology, cover terms for activities.
You're right. By the way, Javier and Debbie both had things to say, so they wrote them in the chat, but we're just sort of going past them. It'd be better if you could say it. Jump in.
I think we did.
Oh, did you? Okay, good.
Yeah. Did you have a new one, Debbie?
Yeah, because we are just talking about should we put the animal training specialist support under the AASA, right? So I was thinking, well, if we wanted to integrate it into it, maybe is it maybe easier to think about the goal of why we're doing the. If I think the goal match, then we can put into it even at different layers. This is what I'm thinking.
So you're saying like subcategories within that category.
Yeah.
When you're saying different layers, if you go down to the second page of Meg's, is that what you're talking about when you say different layers?
Yes.
Yes, so so for example, following that reasoning from Daniela and Debbie and others, if we were to just have animal assisted therapy as is, animal assisted education as is, and then combine animal assisted support services or support activities or one of something like that, would we then need subterms? Is that what you're saying, Debbie, that came off that said particular type of, referred to particular type of support goals?
Yeah, I think it would be we can think about it. We can add a paraprofessional things in the different layers of the animal AASA, because I think the paraprofessional things doing is quite different from the visiting things, but I think we can have two different layers. One is professional handlers and one is paraprofessionals. Yeah, and maybe I think the free category is more easier for the public to digest. Even for me, it's easier to digest. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be really important, even though what we're all talking about is that potentially everything could live under animal assisted support services from those two categories. We would then need to find a home for everybody, not so that we could get too Twitter-pated about everything, but just so that we can actually be inclusive and clear that of the range of support services, because it could just turn into, I don't know, is there any negative or any downside of just grabbing everyone together into one big support services, or is it only positive? Like, I'm just wondering, what are the downsides of just having a very big umbrella category like that, and then just naming them all like that? They would literally just all be named, except they would all be joined into one rather than two.
Well, I think what I see the advantage of this would be if we're talking about the difference between for the general public and the press, as opposed to the people actually involved, then it makes it easier for, public relations, let's say for, looking people from the outside and letting them have, the general things, but expecting the people who are actually doing it to understand the different layers.
Yeah.
Javier.
Well, I have the impression that one of the risks of this group, of this task group, is that everyone here are involved in animal assisted interventions. Thereby, it is easy that we fall in keep trying to work using the same categories, the same definitions that we already had before we started. I would like to ask or to think from a different point of view. Let's forget about what we would like to say. Let's think about other practitioners that are not into animal assisted interventions. For example, psychologists that are not psychotherapists that work including animals, or teachers or professors that don't include animals. I have the impression that if we keep creating new labels, we are going to need to make or to propose a lot of explanations to a lot of people, a lot of practitioners, not only for general populations or mass media. The question is, other professionals, how are going to see us? How are they going to feel that we are doing things? No, and my impression is that at the end, we are proposing 20, 30 new labels, and thereby we should provide 30 explanations to 30 different collectives. In my opinion, that's what I said in the last time that I attended. I think that keep creating new labels can be a mistake, especially if we think about other colleagues that work in our same field, but that are not used to include animals. Because I think that for them, it should be really confusing. And I think it to be important beyond the general population or mass media. The validity and how other scientific other practitioners are going to perceive us, it can be dangerous. I think that it can be dangerous. So for me, creating new labels is not a good option. I think that the most strategic thing is to try to keep it as simple as possible. That's my impression.
Again, I think that we should have, again, it depends for who. I think we have different audiences. And I think just like much of the publishing that I do, I try to publish as opposed to the animal journals, I try to publish in general journals, in psychology journals, in order to advertise what it is we're doing so that other people who are going to read, let's say about at-risk children, and they come across my articles and they say, oh, animal assisted, and well, what is it? And then they're reading about the at-risk children, but they're also getting educated about the mechanisms that are special to us. So I think that's why we should, do a combination of the two. Again, it's in different ways. We still have to get the word out somehow. And again, I think
it's very well, the terminology is very well used here, just to let you guys know. In Australia, animal assisted therapy, animal assisted psychotherapy, animal assisted counseling, animal assisted education, animal assisted, all that is very well known. I think what we're discussing and the important discussion that we're having is on the third category and how to actually talk about it. And I think I really like what everyone's talking about, and I don't know how Laura feels, but I like the animal assisted support services category as a grouping of the third and fourth. I'm not offended by that at all. It just feels big, but I think that it feels inclusive, and it's going to have more freedom for people to be able to self-identify within their animal assisted support services.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having the different descriptions will help people feel like what I talked about at the beginning in terms of with Laura and Pet Partners. Give them credit and say, this is what I'm doing. Let them feel proud of what they're doing, that they are part of it, but they're not the same thing as what other people are doing. I'm always trying to get the message out that, understand the limits of what I know, and you should understand limits of I don't know how to do activities. I just don't know. And it's okay. And if I feel like, I have credit for what I'm doing and be proud of it, and I think then I can go ahead and define what I'm doing and feel good about it without trying to call myself as doing something else. That's why I think part of, our work here is important, for, again, I think we're talking about from us outside and from us inside. We have different goals here, and all of them are important.
So from like a next step, sorry, somebody gonna say something?
I was just saying, I think we're talking about a couple of things here. One is what are we labeling the people involved, and what are we labeling the program types? So I'm getting kind of mixed up. It seems like we're kind of going back and forth between them, and I'm not sure where we are right now. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it is the categories, and then within the categories is when we can build in that rubric piece, right? So there's going to be, whether you're a volunteer, parapro, or professional, in those categories.
Okay. So in that case, then, so we're talking about categories as types of programming, AAT, AAE, whatever, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So one thought I have found confusing, and I've been doing this for many, many years, is animal assisted therapy and animal assisted education. I think I have a clear understanding about, but that gets a little fuzzy too in other countries, I think, for me. But as an occupational therapist, I think of animal assisted therapy for OT, PT, speech, and rec. And I think of animal assisted mental health or animal assisted counseling as being a very separate kind of programming. And I didn't know if others might think about separating those. I know it means adding something else, but they seem so distinctly different as far as physical modalities versus, mental health practices. What do people think about separating those out? And whether it was counseling, social work, psychologists, whomever
Amy,
might.
could you put up the chart with all the umbrella arms? Is this what you're talking about, Laura?
Hold on, I have to just share this one here.
Yeah, so underneath animal assisted therapy, it's all specified.
Right, right. And I understand that because it is therapy, but to me, mental health quote therapy is distinctly different from the therapies that address primarily the physical well-being.
Right, you're going,
Um,
you're thinking of
and
it goal specific. You're going goal specific, right? So like mental health goals versus.
I know I am just in this one area though. That's the only because it's confusing for me, I guess. Yeah. So I guess,
Well,
you know,
just to let you know, Laura, that
Yeah.
counselors and psychotherapists, they refer to their work as therapy too. And
Well, that's
so
what I-
does so
okay.
do psychologists and actually even social workers. So my
Right.
husband's a psychologist, I'm a social worker, I'm a psychotherapist. We all use the
Yep.
term therapy. And I know that
Okay.
OTs use the term therapy.
Okay.
In Australia, physiotherapists, physical therapists are called physiotherapists.
Right.
They always use the term physio,
right.
but everybody uses the term therapy, and that's why they're all needing to be specified.
Okay. And I didn't know if there was a common word like counseling or, you know, mental health, you know, practitioner. I didn't know if there was a common word that would allow everyone doing the mental health therapy, you know, a special kind of a special section, because it seems like that area is growing so much that it warrants kind of having its own label. But you're the practitioners in that, so I'm not. I mean, how do you feel okay being in animal assisted therapy?
I feel
As mental health?
okay. I feel
Okay.
for me, I agree with
Okay.
the Equine Journal article. That is I won't use the term therapy. I will use the term psychotherapy if I'm doing psychotherapy.
Okay.
And I expect people to be using the terminology that they're using. So if they're offering speech
Okay.
therapy, they're offering speech. So for
Okay.
me, even though it's an umbrella term to separate out from education and support,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
still needs to be specified so that the therapeutic goals go very clear.
Okay. And
And
others of
even
you
mental
are-
health-
You're okay with that? Yeah. Okay.
Even mental health is an umbrella term because they're different.
I know.
Different type, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but we're all
Yeah.
doing, you know, but I will never call myself an animal assisted therapist. I will always
Oh.
specifically and honestly say I'm an animal assisted psychotherapist. And
Okay.
if I have a child, for instance, that I think has some issues, some physical issues, I will not try to do therapy on those physical issues. I will then
Right.
refer the child to also be evaluated by an occupational therapist.
Okay.
That's part, and I might, you know, help them work with the
Mhm.
emotional issues that are related to their physical issues. But
Sure.
I also demand from the parents to bring the child to an occupational therapist for evaluation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't, those of you who practice in mental health, you don't find it confusing to be in the same chunk as rehabilitation therapists?
No.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting to me because okay.
Laura and Nancy, just be aware there really is a sharp move, Nancy, not to use animal-assisted psychotherapist, because you are a real psychotherapist. You're a psychotherapist first, who makes a choice to work with animals in your practice.
Yes.
So
explain yourself. Like, there's a move not to say animal-assisted psychotherapy?
yes, and it's particularly coming from the folks who utilize the motion of the horse for therapy. They are occupational therapists first, utilizing the motion of the horse. They're moving away from hippotherapists and defining their therapy through the horse, which implies that they somehow do a different kind of occupational therapy. They're doing good occupational therapy. They merely make the choice to utilize the motion of the horse to do it.
Yeah, I think that any therapist should look at it that way. I'm wondering what could you then call yourself?
That's
and
what the document, the journal article that I synthesized, that the whole focus of that was that they believe that it's discipline first language. So that you say, I'm a psychologist and I incorporate horses into my psychological
Oh, that's a
services.
huge name.
So I'm a psychotherapist and I incorporate animals,
I mean,
etc.
I don't see any reason why the particular individual who does this type of practice needs to label himself with the word animal in its title. You're a psychotherapist who practices animal-assisted psychotherapy, but you are a therapist of some sort first. And I think that's what drives crazy people who come from academia and outside when they see people labeling themselves, I'm an animal-assisted speech therapist. No, you're a speech therapist if you're trained in providing speech therapy, and you've expanded your expertise to include the practice of engaging an animal in your speech therapy. So my preference would be if we could just sort of avoid labeling the individual who provides the practice as something with animal in it. That would be great. I mean, I would suggest for journals to just give that as an instruction. You want to say who is providing that type of activity, that type of therapy, what the qualifications of the person are, but don't call yourself an animal assisted something or other. You are a professional of some sort, or you are a handler, volunteer handler that uses dogs for visiting nursing homes or things like that.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that, because, for instance, you say a red car, it's first and foremost a car.
But who cares?
Why?
Well,
I think it, for instance, okay, maybe because it's so well developed here in Israel, that, for instance, you can't be an animal-assisted psychotherapist. I mean, if you can be a psychotherapist who will bring a dog with you into therapy, but they're not an animal-assisted psychotherapist.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
No,
You're a
because
therapist first.
no, wait a second. Because they can't be an animal-assisted psychotherapist because they didn't study animal-assisted psychotherapy. Here in Israel, there are 3-year programs, 1,100 hours, in order to become an animal-assisted psychotherapist. You're not just a psychotherapist who happens to bring an animal, but rather it's a profession.
Well, it is a profession in the United States too, but first you're trained as a psychotherapist. You don't happen to bring your animal because then you're not providing animal assisted therapy. You have to be trained into how to engage your animal in therapy. So you are a psychotherapist who specializes in animal assisted psychotherapy. I mean,
Yeah.
what's
We
the
have to
point
figure
in
something
calling?
out here? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this gets into another discussion, which is the qualifications of the
Right.
practitioner. So, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, so with that, I wanted to, in our limited time, if we're talking about next steps, like maybe we want to, because I think like these forums are really great, but sometimes I feel like everyone has opinions and then we don't get to just be definitive with anything. So one of two things.
Vote.
Vote. We could vote. I know a lot of people are not here, so I guess we could set it up as a poll. I like that idea. We could like do like a online poll and kind of get an idea there.
Amy, would you
Yes.
like me to redesign the chart as you guys have recommended, that
Yes.
where
Yes.
I redo the chart with the 3 and subsume the last 2 into the animal assisted support services as the terminology was discussed, and then have all the umbrella terms underneath that, and then that gives something for people to vote on?
Yeah, yes,
Because I think some people are a little bit visual and they're not getting what necessarily the specifics of what we're talking about.
yes, I do agree with that, but I think, but I guess whether we're voting on this, the category name or the definition and what parts of the definition, because I think, you know, we didn't include anything that's animal welfare in there, and maybe we can vote on that part too. Like how specific, if we're voting on, like, is it this all together, or do we vote on each specific individual area and finding agreement there? Does that make sense?
Are you talking about defining each name and each category, the definition of each one? I think we've got to get in the ballpark first.
Yeah, and I think we are in the ballpark. I just think if we broke them down, like, I would rather, and correct me if someone has a better idea, instead of saying, here's one chart that has everything, or one umbrella that has all, if we can do segments of it and make sure, like, do we all like this? Do we all like this? Do we all like this? And then once we have that, then we can kind of write it up, our proposal, or our at least white paper. Is that everyone okay with that? Any other ideas?
I liked what you said at the beginning of the meeting about maybe starting with the things we're in agreement with, or finding out what we're in agreement with. So maybe even going back to AAI and starting there, and what the different terminologies were that people suggested, and kind of deciding where that's going to go, and then working down.
I'm getting more specific. Yeah, Javier?
From my point of view, we have two different ways that we are discussing all the time. Some people would rather try to be as specific and as exhaustive as possible. Meanwhile, other people would rather keep it as simple as possible. And I think that perhaps we should, before trying to collect all the terms and all the definitions that we could make, perhaps we should make a decision. Do we believe that keeping it simple is better or worse than making it as exhaustive as possible? Perhaps we should do a pros and contrast. I don't know how to say this in English. All the advantages and disadvantages of both ways of thinking, but not because we like one or the other more or less, but because of the strategy that relies beneath this. It is we are going to opt to create a really concise or a really exhaustive definition because we want to get what? I have my opinion, no? And you have my definition now in the screen because you stop just over the definition. So for me, as simple as possible is the best option, but that's my impression because I work at academy, and for me, it's really important that other colleagues can understand what I do. So when you say, do you identify yourself as an animal-assisted therapist? No, I say that I always do the same old psychotherapy that everyone else that do, but I include a component that is going to foster, is going to make things, is going to empower things up. That's what I say. So I don't need more terms. I'm going to use the most ample term, animal-assisted intervention, just to say that I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm going to include the benefits of human-animal interactions. That's what I say. So I don't need, and I wouldn't call my practice as animal-assisted group systemic or system psychotherapy because it's too long. So I'm going to say I'm doing animal-assisted interventions and psychotherapy and systemics and group intervention, in example. But I'm going to mix up different key concepts. I'm not going to search for a long, really concrete, because at the end, I'm going to be the only one using this. And I like people to be able to find what I do and what I publish, because if not, everyone is speaking like in Babel Tower, no? Everybody speaks it with different terms, with different languages, and at the end, nobody is going to come to an agreement. So for me, perhaps we should make that decision. This is a strategic decision. Are we going to try to be really exhaustive, or are we going to be as simple as possible?
Okay, so are you recommending a vote now, just like a hand raise of terms? Is it doable in this format?
I don't think I know enough of what is being referred to vote on something, because I am, I like seeing the written word and I'm visual. And if I know what I'm agreeing to, then I can say yes or no. But for example, I train animal-assisted psychotherapy and equine-assisted psychotherapy. And I know that the training that I offer, which is postgrad equivalent now, is very different to the room-based psychotherapy training that, for example, I did when I was doing room-based work in, let's say, Gestalt therapy or psychodynamic psychotherapy or family system psychotherapy. So I know the specificity exactly of what we're talking about. And I'm happy to have generic, that's why I was looking at the 3 broad categories of therapy, education, and support services. But I'm not happy to lose the term animal-assisted psychotherapy because, for example, the role of the animal might be one of 20 roles to support change. And the specificity matters, but it doesn't matter in the general terms. So I hold general and I hold specific, and I need to do both very, very clearly in my work. But I would need to be clear on what we're voting on to get a sense of what you're asking a yes or no from, because for me, I need both. I'm general and very general AAT, I live under, but I'm very specific around the psychotherapy and the role of the animals in the psychotherapy is very specific for me.
Yeah.
Meg, what you were saying
but
is
at the end, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But at the end, when I read that someone is developing psychotherapies, I have little idea of what he or she is doing. Because within psychotherapy, you can also play many different roles. The therapist, forget about the animal. The therapist can play different roles, and you can face psychotherapy. We can create many different kinds of encounters using different means. It can. So at the end, I call myself a psychotherapist, but there are many different ways of doing psychotherapy. So at the end, psychotherapy is not even enough to know anything about the role that the therapist is playing. So how many terms would we need to have? At the end, it has to do with what Nancy said about mechanism. We should perhaps need an umbrella term, a generic term, and then add more explanations about the mechanism. Are the dog or the horse play a role of modeling, or perhaps they are going to be I don't know, different roles that they can play. You know?
On the other hand, for instance, an art therapist, you wouldn't have, in other words, you wouldn't say there's something called an art therapist or something called art therapy or music therapy, or people say I'm a CBT therapist, I'm an ACT therapist, I'm a DBT therapist. It's, there are all those terms out there, and then all of a sudden to say, no, but I can't call myself an animal-assisted psychotherapist, even though somebody else can call themselves an art therapist.
But that's the slope.
Art therapy is a degree.
Right. That wasn't my point. My point, you can call yourself whatever, but the point here is for whom it matters so much what the individual practitioner calls him or herself. What matters is we have specific label for that type of practice. Art therapy, animal-assisted therapy, they're equally therapies, and we need to explain what they mean. But before you become an art therapist, you do training in clinical psychology and all sorts of other areas of psychological and practice. So you're first a therapist, and then hopefully once you're credentialed, You do extra training to become an animal
It
assisted
depends on the country.
person, right?
It depends on the country.
Well, I mean, I don't know, I'm not familiar, but can you just become an art therapist without
In
having-
Israel, you can get a master's in art therapy, for instance.
Right, but again, the
And you're
point
not,
is-
you're not first of all a clinical psychologist. After you finish.
Yeah,
your
no, I
master's,
understand you can
get-
have a
yeah.
master's and be right, but why is it so important from the point of view of, you know, the whole field, what people themselves call themselves? That's not what's important when you read a journal article. When you read a journal article, you want to see what is the practice about, what has been done, what are the goals of the practice, the outcomes. You're interested in the practice, not in the person, right? And then, of course, when we talk about credentialing, that's a different step, but I think that's not the discussion we're at now. We haven't even decided on the name for the disciplines and the practices. So people get emotional about what they call themselves, but for whom is that so important? Not for anyone, you know, necessarily, maybe for, I don't know, other than for that individual. I don't know why is it so important to label yourself as a person, some particular type of professional or other. You know, what I'm interested in is what is the practice labeled?
You know, can we just bring it
Yeah.
back out again, right? So
Yeah.
I want to honor all of your time and whatnot. So yeah, bringing it back out. So what we're talking about as far as keeping it simple is the categories. Are we doing whatever the animal related services or animal assisted services or animal assisted, whatever they are, then the subcategories, and then there's like the categories that fit within each of those areas, right? Kind of what we have it in, or do we feel like that it needs to expand even more? Does it need to be, I don't know. And I think that based on the conversation we had, we were trying to keep it moderately simple in the categories and then be a little more specific in the subcategories.
Mhm.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yes, then Meg, if you don't mind kind of, you know, revamping yours a little bit based on the conversation, then we can, again, chunk it out a little bit so that we can comment on each specific area, right? So, yeah.
Okay, so can you just put my chart up again, just so I can be clear with the next time? Do you want me to just keep, if you scroll down to the subcategories underneath, the two that I'm subsuming, do you want me to keep those terms, or would you like me to change those terms, the subcategories in the yellow and the blue only, people? And then just so I can do it really efficiently and bring it back. What are is the terminology okay? Visitation, animal activities, courthouse dogs, etc., all the way down to support horsemanship, etc. Shall I just put group them all under the one?
Yeah, let's just see what it looks like. Like you said, I think everyone's visual and it's easier to edit something once it's there. And then if there's things that need to come out or move, like, you know, and I won't even get into the whole topic now. Like I'm even, I question like the whole training of the guide dogs and service dogs and medical alert dogs.
Yeah.
How that fits in there, but I don't have to open up that can of worms. But everything else, I think fits in there in a nice way.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that then.
I don't know how to work this in, but I guess the problem I have is that not all animal assisted social work is therapy, for instance.
Right. This
Yeah.
we're about to have that secondary rubric, the Daniela's rubric. I think Laura had one very similar, but they're very nice because then you go under credential. What are my goals? What environment am I in? What population am I working with?
Yeah.
So that like this alone is probably, it's a start, but it's not going to be the most definitive because then you have to go into
It's a beginning. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. So, all right, does that sound okay? Is there anything that we missed or anybody wanted to bring up something that we didn't get to talk about?
So could I just ask Amy and maybe Laura, because you're directly involved, shall I just not include training and placement of assistance animals under the third section, which I'll use the term animal assisted support services? And then if I don't put them in there, they're just not on the animal assisted conference at all. Like if we were all together at an animal assisted conference, there wouldn't be any need for any training or trainers of assistance animals and placements of support assistance animals to be there at the conference.
Well, this is,
So let's be.
maybe they want to know just to knowledge, like, you know, if I'm training a dog for different mobility issues or whatever, I'm going to want to know what's out there. I'm going to want to know these things, but I don't think it's necessarily.
I just want to be really clear because there's a big context in Australia. And I know that, for example, and I think even Wendy's in this group, I'm not sure, I haven't seen her, but she's a big advocate for including the assistance animals and the trainers and the places of the assessment animals in animal assisted therapy. And there's just a really important context in Australia. There's a lot of us that have a lot of different opinions about that. But I think if we're actually the committee that's deciding this across an international forum, I just need to be really clear about what it is that you guys are asking me to do.
So if it's fair, we can leave it in for now. It can be part of what we vote on. We have our own 20 members and then we have got, you know, our broader members. So we'll get good representation. You know?
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So when do we want to meet again in a month? Does that continue to work? I know it gets into summer. I know there's people are traveling. So
One question, is Saturday somehow a magical day for everyone? And that was the one day we could meet, or is there any way to avoid Saturday?
well, here's the problem. The problem comes is that people work during the week, right? And then it's hard for Debbie to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning when she has to work the next, right? So Saturday worked for that reason alone. I mean, do Fridays work okay? I mean, I understand wanting to keep weekends, you know, sacred and honoring work-life balance and all that, but I think we did have a hard time, like, oh, I teach Tuesday nights, I'm available Wednesdays, but I work during the day, I have a second job here. So if I can just bring it up to Friday, are Fridays open for people?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine for me. I work every day.
You work
Yeah,
every
Debbie, you strike me as somebody who never has downtime.
I know, Debbie, you're making us look bad. All right.
It's
So
a Sunday here, just to let everyone know.
yeah, so you have your whole day of rest. And sorry, I meant May, not June. I'm jumping way ahead. So May. So if we said a Friday in May, does like the 13th or 20th work?
13th.
13th. Okay. And what time of day? Same time of day? When you want to move it up, back?
I'd be willing to be up late or super early to accommodate some of these people who have been doing, you know, moonlighting here.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah,
care about
it's-
time of day.
Nancy, Debbie, Meg, they've got.
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning for me now, but that's okay. I'm up in 6 hours.
I know.
For me, the same,
It's okay.
the same also.
Okay, so would we like to move it back up? I mean, would anything be helpful? This
Okay.
this time works okay?
Mhm.
Okay, all right, so then Meg, you'll do your part, then I can create a mechanism that I can send out so that at least we'll have something to work with in May.
On Friday, the 13th.
Friday.
All right, great.
Lucky day. Okay, for 4 o'clock, my time, the 13th. All right. Well, that was good. Good dialogue there.
It's good that we're feeling more comfortable and people can talk more freely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's fewer people on, so that helps too. You know, when we have the larger group, it's a little hard to navigate, but not that we don't miss them, but. All right. So
Nice conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank all of you.
Thank you,
and
everybody.
we'll see you in a month.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.